Okay, let's put down a microprocessor. So for a microprocessor, you want to tack down one pin first. So take one of the corners and put a little bit of solder on the circuit board pad. Now you want to align that circle, that is the pin 1 circle, you want to align it with the circle on the circuit board. That is the positioning. And then I kind of drag it into place and I try and solder down that one pin. Now it's a little bit shifted. The pads aren't totally centered, so I'm going to try and push it over a little bit to the left, which I do here. Unfortunately, I pushed it off, but then I seem to get a little bit lucky here, and it seemed to land pretty much centered. So now I'm going to do the opposite corner, and I'm going to try and tack down one pin on the opposite corner. So I'm coming in, and I'm trying to heat up the pad and the component lead and then feed in the solder, but the solder doesn't seem to be cooperating today. Now I've accidentally soldered 2 pins down in that corner. I don't think I've noticed it yet, and I'm trying to center it properly by only heating up the last one. But then I think I kind of figured it out, and I was able to heat up both of them and center them. Now if you take a look, the toe spacing, if you look around the part, the toe spacing at the end of the component lead to the end of the pad is pretty much the same everywhere, and that's a good centering. I think I decided to put a little bit of flux down because the solder didn't seem to be wetting very well. The board might be a little oxidized. So now that I've got 2 corners down and I've got it centered properly, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to solder up all the pads. There's one side. That one's done. So here I'm getting pretty good soldering. I'm heating up the component lead and the circuit board pad, and I'm feeding the solder in from the other side. So you can solder these pretty much like normal, like you would a through-hole part if you have the right tip. And then this last side you won't be able to see me do. So that's how I put in the 16U2. So now I'm going to show you how to do the 328P part. Because this video shows you how to deal a little bit with bridges. So I position the part and I try and tack down one corner, getting things centered, and it looks like that's pretty well centered. And then I go in, I don't do the opposite corner on this one. I do this one over here so that it's easier for me to film it. So that is soldered in. And then I'm trying to adjust the rotation just a little bit, pull it down. I thought the pads on the sides weren't quite centered, and that looks a little bit better. So what I'm looking for is that the toe spacing around the whole part on each side is about the same, the distance between the end of the component lead and the end of the pad. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and solder the rest of the footprint down, and I'm noticing that the solder isn't really jumping, going liquid to the solder joint. So I've decided to put a little bit of flux down. This could be that the solder is a little old, or that the boards have been sitting out for a while and the boards are a little oxidized. So now I go in and I solder everything up. There's a little bit of a bridge that I created there. I'm going to show you how to deal with that in a second. And I'm going to go over here and do this side. Now again, I accidentally create a bridge. But if you just go in with the iron right after, you might be able to pull that bridge out, which is what I did there. And I'm going to do that again on this side. So here I form a bridge down on one of these last 2 leads. There it is. If I just go in again real quick with the iron, the solder, the excess solder will jump to the iron. I'm doing the top ones, and I ended up with a couple of bridges up here. So there's 2 bridges up there. Now removing bridges works better with the big tip. And what you do is you clean it off real good on your sponge, and then basically you slide it in up to the pins, and a couple at a time, and the excess solder will go onto the soldering iron. So every time you do this, you kind of clean it off on the sponge, keep the iron clean so that the solder wants to go to the iron instead of hanging on to the pins. And there I am doing the top. So everything looks pretty good. A little bit of excess solder on the bottom left pin. Clean it up with a little bit of alcohol. Looks pretty good. So in this last little bit here, I want to show you what to look for when you're doing your visual inspection. So these two pins that I'm looking at, you can see that there's a little bit of a shadow between the component lead and the circuit board pad, almost like there's a line between the two. And if you look at the solder on the leads, it looks a little bulbous, but it doesn't really look like there's any solder on the components. And you can see if I get in here with the tweezers and I give it a little bit of a shove to one side or the other, you can see that it's actually not soldered to each other. So let's wait till it focuses here. So that pins 2 and 3 from the left at the top there, you can see that one there, I'm actually pushing on it and it's moving sideways. So those two pins are not soldered. So you're looking for a shadow between the two, and you're also looking for no solder on the actual circuit board pad, and that tells you that they're not soldered. See at the toe there, you can see the end of that component lead, just a little bit too good. That's an indicator of a bad solder joint.